I'm Andrew, and I'm setting out to make better videos for diesel enthusiasts. Follow along as I review products, do how-tos, and share my personal trucks here on Just Diesels.
Gauges are something that isn't necessarily fun, right? It's not like it's gonna add power, it's not gonna make the truck ride better, but it's one of those important building blocks whenever you're modifying, especially a diesel vehicle. I'm putting 37s on this truck, I'm about to tune it, I'm about to do a lot of stuff to this truck, and so I need to keep an eye on everything that's going on this truck because I'm moving away from the factory parameters. I'm doing things that the factory didn't intend to do. So now I gotta keep an eye on stuff. So to make all that happen, I decided to do the Edge Insight CTS3, which is exactly what I had on my other 3rd gen, and my OBS, and about to have in my 2nd gen. And there's a reason for it. It is, in my opinion, the best gauge setup on the market for these trucks. It's not the easiest to install per se, but I think it's easier than a lot of other gauge systems. But most importantly, it gives you just a huge amount of information right at your fingertips. You get alerts, you get all kinds of stuff. So let's dig into what I'm doing on this truck. But what's cool about the Edge Insight CTS system is that you can expand on it. So right now I have a very basic setup. It would be called the competition pack. So it's gonna come with a pressure sensor, a temperature sensor, EGT, and those are external PIDs that aren't monitored by the truck already. I also added an additional pressure gauge, so I'm gonna be swapping that out for the temperature gauge, but I can continue to daisy chain on here as much as I want. In fact, you can actually even do electronic stuff on this as well. So they make a harness so that you can use your Insight as a switch. I'm gonna be doing a switch pros for that. So for this, what I'm doing is just monitoring everything on the truck. I really wanted to have oil pressure because I have that on my 1st gen and I love being able to keep an eye on oil pressure. That's a huge thing when the truck is cold. You'd be amazed at how high oil pressures are, especially at higher RPMs. So with the truck being a stick and me having to kind of shift a little bit higher sometimes, I want to make sure that I wasn't pushing things under unnecessary strain. Also, exhaust temp, that is a mandatory gauge on pretty much any diesel, whether it's stock or not, especially since this truck is going to be tuned. Now I can keep an eye on my EGTs, make sure everything is staying nice and cool. Finally, fuel pressure. I wanted to monitor fuel pressure on this truck. That's gonna be pressure going into the CP3 because the truck is already monitoring rail pressure. So now I can see pressure into the CP3 and I can also see pressure out of the CP3 in the rail. So I can keep an eye on the whole fuel system. I'm gonna be installing a FASS on this truck as well. So what's gonna be cool is now I'm gonna have a baseline number for my fuel pressure and I can see what it's at after the FASS.
So inside the truck, the way we're gonna mount the Edge Insight CTS3 is I have a OEM Mopar SRT 10 pillar. This is off of the SRT 10 package 3rd gen trucks, and it gives you a single mount. In this single pillar pod mount, we're gonna be mounting the Edge adapter piece. So this adapter basically turns any single pod mount into an Edge Insight mount. So I installed that on the bench. That was actually already on the truck. Before I started filming this video, I already had this on here to verify RPM.
Now Edge also makes ones that fit specifically for the CTS3. So if you have a year truck that applies to, go for it. Otherwise, if you're like me where there isn't necessarily a fit option for it, I'm just gonna run a single pod and then adapt it with the Edge pod adapter.
And then underneath down here, the actual Edge is gonna get information from the truck itself through the OBD2 port, which is gonna plug in like that. So anything from the OBD2 will be monitored through that. So RPM, if you're an automatic, transmission lockup, all that stuff's being monitored through that automatically, which is pretty cool. It's also gonna monitor oil pressure, trans temp, things like that. I'm also gonna be doing external sensors as well. So you'll notice I actually already have this out to run amp steps today, but this hole in the firewall is a port that we can run different wires and cables through. So I popped that little grommet out. There's a rubber grommet. I popped that out because I'm going to be running the harness for the Edge through there. And then if you see in the actual Edge harness itself right here, there's this little connector. So that little connector right there is what you're gonna plug all of the EAS external gauges into. So it's actually really nice because the bulk of them are in the engine bay, and then the rest of them get plugged into this. So this is a super cool little piece. So that's what we're gonna be using to plug everything else into, but I figured I'd give you guys a good view of this before we start plugging everything in. So here's how everything works on the gauge side. So if you notice, this port is the one that I showed you earlier that goes into the little module on the unit that's in the truck itself. So that's gonna be the communication between these gauges and the screen in the truck. So for these gauges, the way that works is it actually daisy chains. So you'll see that there's these little connectors and you can continue to add these as you go. So if you come up with more gauges down the line, just continue to add on these daisy chain harnesses. They're really well designed to be easy to do that with. So this one, you'll see I have an A and B sensor. Make sure you remember which one goes where, because when you turn on the Insight, it's gonna ask you. So you're gonna say, fuel sender A, or sender A is gonna be fuel pressure, sender B is gonna be oil pressure, whatever you wanna assign it to. They also have temperature gauges. Pretty much any gauge you could want to is gonna be added on to here. You're also gonna see our EGT gauge. So this one adds into the daisy chain as well. That one is going to connect right here to this port. Super easy. And then for fuel pressure, this is something that I got extra. So this is from Genus Garage. This is gonna be a tapped Banjo Bolt that's gonna go to the CP3. And then that tapped Banjo Bolt goes to this big hydraulic hose line. All this is to isolate the gauge itself from the vibration of the engine so it lasts longer. So we're gonna be doing that, and that should make things last a lot longer. Hopefully be just easier to run as well. So that's that piece right there. And that's pretty much everything for this. The one thing you will also notice is that this is the grommet that I pushed out of the firewall of the truck. You'll notice that this doesn't fit through there. So what we're gonna have to do is basically cut this little tail off of it, make a little slice right there, and that's gonna give us the clearance that we need to be able to pass that through the firewall into the actual harness of the Insight, and that way all this stuff will display on the screen.
Now normally, let's say I didn't run any external PIDs, I could just plug the Insight into the OBD2 port on my truck and it would read everything the truck already reads. So that would be trans temp, that would be on an automatic, you'd see gear position, torque converter lockup. You'd see all kinds of really interesting, really informative stuff. What you're missing though is exhaust temp, and that's kind of the big thing. Fuel pressure's nice, oil pressure's nice, but exhaust temp is really the key item that you need to add on there. So that's where these whole daisy chain things come on. So let me show you, I'm gonna walk you through basically all the steps of installing this Insight. The screen, not so much, that's pretty easy. I feel like everyone's figured that out, but I'm gonna show you where to find oil pressure, where to find fuel pressure, how to run that, how to do EGT, all that stuff. So let's dig into this thing. So starting with the easiest one, oil pressure is going to be located on top of the oil fill canister. You'll notice there's a 1/8 NPT plug bolt there. Basically just unthread that, thread in the new sensor from Edge, and you're done. It is literally that easy. For fuel pressure, what you're going to want to do is look at the Banjo Bolt on the top of the CP3. There's basically one exposed Banjo Bolt, and that's the one that's running from the fuel filter housing to the CP3. That's exactly what we want to measure. That's fuel pressure before the CP3, but after the fuel filter. So to get that off, basically you're just gonna undo that with a ratchet. And then what you need is a tapped Banjo Bolt. Now, Genus Garage sells a tapped Banjo Bolt for these trucks, so I'll link that down below. They also sell a really cool long vulcanized hose. Now, the reason for this hose is you wanna isolate the sensor from the vibration of the engine. Talked about this a little bit on the second gen stuff, but any kind of fuel pressure sender doesn't like to be mounted on the engine block. So we're gonna use that to get it over. Now I'm gonna show you guys how that's done because it's a little bit more complicated than just bolting it on like the oil pressure sensor.
So I apologize that I couldn't show you guys this in real time, but it just took too many hands to make happen. So I'm gonna walk you guys through what's going on here. So this hose, the whole purpose of it is to isolate this sensor from the vibration of the engine block itself. Otherwise I would just mount it straight to the CP3. But with this hose, now I have a giant air pocket. So what we're gonna be doing is filling this whole hose up with air. So what you're gonna do is install everything up until this sensor, and then you're gonna have someone else hop in the truck and bump the starter. What I mean by bumping the starter is basically taking the starter and going one click in. So it's just gah! So it initiates the starter, starts the lift pump going. That's really what we're after, is starting the lift pump going. This thing is going to fill up with fuel, and fuel is gonna shoot out, thus the bucket. So catch any extra fuel in the bucket, put your thumb over it to hold the fuel in there and not let any more air in, and then thread this sensor on, and you're gonna be good to go. But ideally what you want is this whole hose to be filled with fuel. And again, you want to try and keep this process as clean as possible because you are forward of the fuel filter. So you have no filtration after this. Whatever you get in here is going straight to your injector. So just try and be conscious of keeping everything nice and clean. Now, in terms of hiding this hose, what I found best is that I usually run it up this way, around here, down below the tip-em, and then I usually zip tie it right here up on the front of the firewall of the truck. Just a nice way to keep everything kind of tucked away and, keep this hose kind of out of the way of the belt and the fan and all that stuff. About as good as you can get to keep it cleanly routed.
So now that we've got that out of the way, it's time for EGT. Now EGT is a little bit more work. This is probably the hardest part of this entire process. So for EGT, there are a lot of different schools of thought on how this should be done. Basically, the idea is that you don't want to have metal shavings get into the exhaust on the turbo housing. Now, a lot of people think that it's actually totally fine to have exhaust shavings on the turbine. It just pushes them out. Other people think that it will completely kill the turbine. I don't really know where the truth lies in there. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. You don't want to have all the metal shavings land on the turbo, but I think a couple, it's going to be completely fine. So my theory has always been basically to just drill and tap the manifold as you would, but I use a vacuum below it. So hopefully the vacuum sucks out most of the metal shavings, and any little ones that do make it past, I think they won't be a huge deal. In terms of a location, I'll show you guys where you want to do that.
So to show you guys where we're drilling, ideally what you want to do is drill it in the collector. So I'm going to be putting the hole right here, which is going to be getting the bank of back 3 cylinders. This is the merge collector for those back 3. Number 6 is always going to be the hottest. So doing this is going to give me an average of the back 3, which is exactly what I want. If I do it off the front 3, that's going to be colder. It's fine, but ideally I want the worst case scenario. So doing it off these back 3 will give me an average of those back 3. And I have the supported manifold, so it has these little bars here. Most of them don't have this, so you don't have to worry about it. You're gonna just drill the hole right here. On mine, I gotta drill it right here, which is gonna be just up from this support here for the turbo. So to do that, I'm gonna start with a center punch. I'm gonna punch a hole right there, and then I'm gonna start with a small drill bit, work up, and then tap and thread it.
Now, once you have the center punch marking where you want to start your hole, you're going to start with a small bit. Now, I don't go too small on this because the smaller you go, the more chance you risk breaking the bit off in the manifold, and that's not good. I don't want to drop my turbo today. So I go with a little bit larger bit, and this is kind of up to you, but just something that I feel like won't snap off in the manifold if it gets caught for any reason. So I usually drill a pilot hole with that, get things started, and then I just step things up slowly, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, you want to be a little bit careful because sometimes when you do that, you'll notice that the bits will actually catch a little bit more. So make sure that your gaps between sizing are enough that you're not having the bit like grab as it's going, or tight enough that it's just perfectly doing a little bit every time. But don't do that weird little middle ground where you get the bit catching, because then you'll have a metal shaving that's big that might fall into the turbo. Ideally, you want as tiny shavings as possible because those probably won't hurt anything. Once you've tediously taken the time to drill out the manifold, it is time to tap it. So I'll show you guys how that is done.
So the final thing left is going to be to tap and thread the hole that we just drilled so that our EGT probe can actually thread into it. So this is a 1/8 NPT tap. We're going to be using this to thread the fitting there. And yeah, basically this one just go real slow. I'm going to grease the threads and you're going to go in, back, in, back, in, back. What you really want to avoid is trying to snap off any of these thread makers. But this is going to allow us to thread the manifold so that this will thread right in and we'll be good to go. So of course, the threading tool for the tap doesn't fit past this AC line. So what am I having to do? Using a crescent wrench. So it works, just takes forever. So I'll kind of show you guys the process here. So basically what we're going to be doing here is you turn it in until it kind of gets hard to turn, back it off, keep going, back it off, keep going, and I'll be here for the next 3 years. But that's the basic process of threading it, and the whole point of greasing it is so that the little teensy tiny flakes that come off of this process will just get stuck in the grease and they don't actually end up in the turbo. So hopefully we've done a decent job of keeping metal shavings out of the turbo, and like I said earlier, let's say if you get past, it seems like it's fine based on my experience. I have known so many people that have done this the wrong way, just literally drilled a hole, not even thought twice about it, and never had any issues. So that helps you sleep at night. I've definitely seen a lot of people do it the wrong way and not have anything bad happen to them. So you heard me talking about metal shavings. In an attempt to get out anything that was left, I fashioned this little guy. So it's a tube attached to my shop vac. And I'm basically just gonna go in here and vacuum out the hole that I just drilled to get anything that I might have left behind. So once you have it tapped, you should be able to thread in the little bung off of the EGT gauge, no problem. So we're gonna thread that guy in there, snug it up, again with my little trusty crescent wrench. Make sure you just snug it decently because that's your only seal against the exhaust. But now that it's snugged in, you're gonna get the actual EGT probe on there.
So once it's successfully tapped, it is very easy. Basically, all you're gonna do is just thread in your new fitting for the coupler, put in the thermocouple, and you're done. You are now measuring exhaust temp on the truck. Oh wait, it's not wired yet. So that's the fun part. So you gotta wire all this stuff, and I'm a little bit more OCD than most. I like to wrap every single piece of everything in wire loom. Just keeps the engine bay looking cleaner, keeps everything protected. So I wrap all the harnesses in wire loom. Now for this one, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna route the EGT up and over the firewall of the truck. Same thing with oil pressure. I'm gonna wrap it up over the firewall, around the battery box, around the coolant reservoir, back down and underneath the intake tube to get to the oil pressure. On the other side of the truck, for fuel pressure, I'm gonna wrap it around the battery boxes down, and then I have the actual sender for that sensor. So they're kind of tucked up against the fender there. That way it's kind of out of the way of the engine, tucked away from water and stuff like that. Hopefully it'll keep it relatively protective. Again, everything's all wrapped up in wire looms. That'll keep it nice and tucked away. Once all that's done, you can zip tie everything into place, knock everything down, and it's time to mount the actual module itself. For the actual daisy chain connectors for the Edge, I like to be careful that I can add more to them. So I try and position it in a way that lets me add more on easily and not have to undo absolutely all of my work. So what I found that's easiest is actually if you put it next to the brake fluid reservoir, there's a couple little places that you can tuck it in right in there, and that way you have access to add more on if you need to, or you can just leave it as it is. But it's a really nice kind of clean way to mount it. I'll just zip tie it up, and that way I have clean, easy access to everything, and the wires coming out of it have easy access, so I can run all the Insight gauges out to where they need to be, and then I can run the main wire down into the dashboard and into the actual Edge screen itself. Now for the actual gauges connecting to the screen, it's actually really cleverly designed, so only one cable runs up to the Edge itself. That is very, very simple. I'm glad they did it that way. On that cable, you'll see a large black block with a plug in it. That plug is perfectly sized for the one that I showed you earlier that comes off of the Edge. So you can mount that in there, and that way it is a single plug that connects all of your PIDs. Even as you continue daisy chain more on there, everything connects in through that. It's a brilliantly simple system. Now for actual setup on the screen side of things, once you turn it on, it's probably gonna ask you to do a software update. What's really cool about the CTS3 is it's actually Wi-Fi compatible. So as long as you have access to Wi-Fi, or you can even hotspot your phone, you can update the thing anywhere. It used to be that you'd have to plug it in your computer. It was a horrible process. I hated it. With this, it can now software update itself wirelessly. So hallelujah, it is so nice to be able to do that. This one's already been configured since I already had this on my truck, so I don't need to update the software, but what I do need to do is insert the new PIDs, give them names, all that stuff. So when you turn on the Edge, it's going to prompt you saying that there are new PIDs that you want to configure. So you can go in and name them, you can go in and set parameters and all kinds of stuff on that. So it's really cool. It's actually quite intuitive. So with that, you now have fully installed gauges on your truck if you've been following along, and I've got fully installed gauges on this truck, which I'm pretty stoked on. Now there's a reason why I love this Edge system, and it's because it, one, works, two, it's just really easy to use, three, I really like that it works as an alert system. So one of the key things about gauges is that they show you when something's going wrong, right? But if it's going wrong and it's not telling me, I'm just cruising down the road, I'm looking at traffic, I'm looking at other things, I have no idea what my fuel pressure is. So what's cool about the CTS3 that I really like is I can set alert parameters. So I can go in for each PID and configure an alert. I can configure one to have a warning that flashes on the screen, maybe to make noise, whatever. You can configure it at different levels, but that way it's going to give you information whether it's below or above the threshold that you set. And that is a really cool tool. All right, so hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Hopefully that helps you guys understand why you'd want to put one of these on here. I also have a more lengthy review of this product if you want to see that on my channel. I will link that below. You can also click here and find that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this helps you guys out, and I'm gonna continue documenting this truck as I go along. So now I've got gauges. Next step is gonna be tune, suspension, all kinds of fun stuff. So I got a lot of stuff in the works. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you on the next video.